Right. Welcome, Dmitry. It's
Hello.
a pleasure to have you here. He wrote Metro 2023 when he was 17, 16. What?
It was actually conceived back in the high school. Yeah, so
Why?
speaking
Why?
about-
You?
I'm sure nobody here knows about me, so I'll just have to sell myself. I'm sorry. So I wrote that book. It used to be 3 times smaller, called
Right.
Metro 2033. It's about Moscow, Russia after nuclear war.
So you had the idea while
Prophetic.
you were traveling to school and by metro?
Yeah, exactly. So back in the times of my high school, I lived in Moscow. So I was taking daily rides on the subway of Moscow in the metro trains from my home to my school and back. 1 hour there, 1 hour to go back. And then I discovered that the subway of Moscow is actually the world's biggest nuclear shelter. I was amazed by that, and then I started digging. And then I was also a big fan of the post-apocalyptic fiction, so I decided to merge these things, and I wrote a book about Muscovites surviving a nuclear war in the tunnels and on the stations of the subway
So
of
you
Moscow.
wrote a book and he published it online. And it's fantastic
20 years
publishing.
ago.
Many years ago.
20
and
years ago.
because you told me once in an interview, you wanted your literature to spread like a virus.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I wanted to bypass the publishers, and back at the time I was very impatient. So I definitely wanted to make a quick, not wait till some publisher finds me and then acknowledges me and then decides if they want or not actually to publish me. So I just used the new opportunities that internet provided, created a website for myself, and published the entire text of the book there online.
5 million free downloads, am I correct?
Yeah, well, I think that by now it's more.
Yeah.
And it's growing because in spite of all the paper publications, the book is still there online for free.
You still have it there.
Yeah, I still have it there, and I'm distributing the free downloadable PDFs in Russian.
Right, because after that, those are normal publishing success in the sense that you were published in many languages, like 37, am I correct?
40 by now, but
40 by now, good. I mean, millions copies sold. Afterwards, the video game series, authored by you,
Yeah.
directly. And one thing which is interesting, can you explain what's the for you? Is there a difference between video games and literature, or is it the same universe you're trying to create?
Well, I definitely when I started playing when I was in my early teens, basically. So I was a big fan of games which back at the time lacked narrative, right? So when I was approached by the Ukrainian developer called 4A, before me they created a game called Stalker. I was very excited because I was a fan of their feeling, the aesthetics that they were creating. And then I had a book, and they needed a story. And the book is about people surviving in the tunnels and on the stations of Moscow subway, where they create new post-apocalyptic states and culture and civilization. So it was a perfect match for them. So the first book they just adapted, the first game they just adapted from the book. I only had to read the dialogue and make sure that the dialogue feels authentic enough. But basically, to your question, I always had the approach that the games should be told as seriously as the grown-up TV series by HBO are being told, or by the good art house movies. So the games should not avoid being controversial, they should not avoid being dramatic, and even in the case of the Metro franchise, the games have allowed themselves to be both philosophical and lyrical, sentimental at some points. Definitely they were not just mere shooters. And that what helped us differentiate, because the budgets were so low. The only way we could stand out was through narrative and through the atmosphere, because definitely we cannot be investing as much, they being a tiny studio from Ukraine, and I'm being a no-name author from Russia. We cannot outmatch the huge behemoths from I don't know, Take-Two or other companies, or Activision.
You were saying the Metro franchise, because the universe you created has a life in itself now. It
totally.
continues even without you.
Yeah, well, it's living a life of its own, definitely. There are First of all, big video games. It's a gaming franchise, what I'm referring to.
Right.
And then there is a trilogy of the books. So this book is so big because it's a trilogy written over 20 years. It's not just
a long book.
This is not the proof of my graphomanic, you know. So basically, I can do without writing. And then there were a couple of projects of attempts of turn that into a movie, which failed so far. And then there was a big number of like fan fiction books written by other authors, which have already been published in Russia and some other countries as well, which form together the universe, like the post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear war universe of Metro.
You were up to doing a film in Russia. Why you didn't do it?
Well, I wanted to do it, but then I was banned from doing it because I supported the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny after him being poisoned and then arrested. So I did a video in his support, and that was a red flag for the like in Russia there is no independent movies, no independent filmmaking. It's either directly controlled by the state through the State Film Fund and the Ministry of Culture, or when it's private, it's owned by Putin's friends, basically. So whatever somebody is blacklisted, such as myself, in Russia because of my criticism of Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine, they just banned the person whatsoever from any kind of creative activities. So the actors can be blacklisted for their protest, the directors can be blacklisted, the authors can be blacklisted. They never get a job up until the moment where they come and atone and excuse themselves, So which I didn't want to do. So the project of a film adaptation of Metro 2033 was blocked by the administration of the president.
Right, it's really, I mean, you imagined a dystopian world, you know, I mean, in the metro of Moscow, and then we had these pictures coming from Kyiv or Kharkiv of people, you know, in the
subway,
underground, in the subway, because of bombing by Russia. What kind of feeling did you have when
you... I was horrified. You know, the thing is, I love Russia. I adore Ukraine, and I had readers both there and there. I'm from Moscow originally, and then my readers from Ukraine, from Kharkiv and from Kyiv started sending me pictures of themselves hiding on the stations of the subways of Kyiv and Kharkiv, exactly the way I'm describing that in the books. You know, in the book, everything starts with a nuclear bombing of Moscow, when the subway of Moscow is like 60 meters below the ground. The stations are very deep, and they are equipped with airlocks, so that which make them hermetic, and air filters. So basically, they're built as a nuclear shelter, as a bunker. So I was just describing this as a fantasy, and then my fellow Ukrainian readers started to be hiding in the stations of Kyiv subway, which looks very similar, if not exactly the same, to the subway of Moscow, because of the Russian bombs. And it was horrifying. Actually, you know, like as an author who thinks about future and tries to predict certain things, usually you get excited when you make a right guess, you know, but in this case I was just in horror, you know, and I tried to support them as much as I could. Definitely that was not the prediction I was happy about making right.
In your universe, in the Metro 2033 universe, people, the survivors, recreate a society which is, strangely enough, doing the same mistakes that were done and that produced the catastrophe.
Yeah.
Do you see something of this dystopian idea realized, unfortunately, today with the war in Russia? Or
well, this dystopian idea was actually not a fantasy. It was an accurate description of the processes going on in Russia for the last 20 years, when the Russians got so nostalgic about the lost empire, the lost greatness of the Soviet Union, that they started to recreate it, together with all the mistakes that were made there, and together with all the worst parts of the Soviet Union. And right now, like today is May the 9th, as we know, and then the Russian troops are parading through the Red Square, in reincarnating the old Soviet military parades through the Red Square, and the Russian troops
Just
are
today.
trying.
Just
It's
now.
just now, actually, a couple of hours ago. Yeah. So Russia is cosplaying the Soviet Union, but in particular the worst parts. So the Soviet Union was at least a social state where people in the late time of Soviet Union could get a free education and free medicine. Right now, people are just left with themselves. The power is usurped by some imposters, and they pretend to be the Soviet Union just by the flags and the army and all that shit, you know. So they are recreating. They pretend they recreate the past, but they only taking the worst practices from that past, you know. And then it's a very rotten cosplay of what's going on right now in Russia. And then we are repeating, unfortunately, the horrible mistakes of the past. And it's already costing hundreds of thousands of human lives, both in Ukraine and in Russia, horribly.
And it's costing you, I mean, it costed you a film.
Yeah, well, it cost me more than a film, yeah.
It costed you, you know, you had to live for another country. You are on trial in Russia, in absentia. And how is your trial doing?
Well, the trial's going well, you know. Without me, I'm not there. Yeah, so they're likely to give me like 10 to 15 years because of saying that the war should be stopped and that Vladimir Putin is personally responsible for it. So you cannot call a war. It should be called a special military operation. Otherwise, you're discrediting the Russian army. Yeah, so...
You wrote a letter to your judge.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
What did you say? What did you tell?
Well, they have introduced, they have passed a special new law that says that it's punishable to spread the false informations about the actions of Russian army. And right now...
207.3.
Ah, you know that, yeah.
Yes.
To the letter, yeah, 207.3. Actually, it's a law about military censorship, that you cannot say anything about this war that is different from the official statements of the defense ministry. If you have your own opinion, or you think that Russians commit war crimes, or you say that they're bombing the residential areas, that you get your 10 years, you know, like, and then it's rolling now.
How do you feel like, I mean, in perspective, you won't be able to get back to your country for a long time?
Well, it is sad, definitely. At the same time, what I'm feeling now is that this country is not the country that I used to love. You know, it's reigned by fear and pretending that nothing is going on. So people are just trying to be conform, and then they do not dare to say, and even start not to dare even think freely about what's happening. It is clear that this war is inflicting the biggest damage to your basic core feeling of just and unjust, fair and unfair, good and bad, and evil. And you're not allowed to say the truth. You're not allowed to think the truth. And this is very disturbing, of course. So even if the buildings are there and the people are there, it is different people, you know. And then usually I'm calling to some of my friends in Moscow and they say, yeah, but the restaurants are full and the theaters are full. You know, so what? I'm sure that under Mussolini, the theaters and restaurants were full as well as under Hitler, up until the late 30s, you know, and even when Berlin got bombed, people were still going to cabarets. It's not a sign that you're living in a free state. The sign of living in a free state is that you can speak out freely without second thought, without fearing for the consequences. Like people who remain in Russia, they either join with the dark force and they are not afraid, or they try to remain independent, but they have to shut up, control every word that they say. So do I miss living in such country? No. Why do I hope to return once this
Putin
regime
still
falls? Yes.
has support.
Well, when you control the entire media, when you have blocked all the opposition news websites and just opinion sites and gaming forums where they have dared to speak about the Ukrainian war, everything, like dozens of thousands of websites blocked by the censorship. When you have a full control of the police and secret police and you name it, National Guard, and they're all very well paid and they're loyal, then you do control, then you have support, of course. And then you control also the public opinion research institutions, which simulate you any kind of support you want. You know, when you have a total grip on the country, then people say like, we support him, yeah, just don't beat us.
Yes, what I say is that probably if you had done a poll in Italy in 1937, everybody would say, oh,
of course,
in Ethiopia, perfect.
Of course.
Right, we don't have much time. Just one thing before asking if anybody wants a question. You're abroad, but you're doing lots of things. Can you tell us just the very last project in a few lines, please,
Yeah, well,
Dmitry?
you know, like although this is a franchise dedicated to the post-apocalyptic world, so it's kind of like between science fiction and dystopia. I also am doing other things as well, like screenwriting, currently working on a script set in like a noir techno thriller set in the States. Then I wrote recently a theatrical play on Holocaust, playing in Poland, wartime Poland. That's going to be put on stage in London later this year.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. There are a lot of historical references, and then I've been working on that script for the last several years. But thanks to the changes that are happening now in Russian society, especially the influence of fear on conformism and accepting your destiny and the passivity, some of these things you could not have imagined how they work in reality. And when you read that in the books, unless it's written by the people who witnessed that, like, it's totally different. And then I've made a couple of very important discoveries because of this war and because of the behavior of both Russians and Ukrainians in this war. So interestingly, yeah. So basically, a lot of projects ahead. You know, hopefully, they will work out somehow.
Good luck.
Thank you very
So,
much.
anybody wants to ask questions to Dmitry?
Hi.
So you mentioned that part of the job of an author is the ability of forecasting a possible future, right? So how do you imagine a future where Vladimir Putin will no more rule Russia?
Yeah. So what he has in plan for Russia, or what will actually happen?
If you had to write a book, what would you write?
Well, I think that's his own plan was to take possession of Slavic republics, Belarus and Ukraine, isolate, encapsulate, and become China's vassal, and then become dependent on Chinese technology and deliver them with energy resources, and then like separate themselves from Europe and from the West, because Europe and the West generally will be asking for more political freedom ultimately. China doesn't need that. On the contrary, China is supporting authoritarian regimes with both technologies and money. So I think that was the plan, and that would help him perpetuate his regime beyond his own life, right? What will actually happen now, I think that the war will last maybe 5 to 6 more years. Putin personally would last maybe up to 10 years. He does look particularly sick. Through this time, Russia is going to be poorer and poorer. He will have to increase the political control. There's going to be more propaganda, more repressions against the people. And he will be personally degrading. Has already quite degraded. This process will become worse, and so in 10 years, there's going to be a turmoil because he's going to be gone, and he's not leaving a successor. He also not just controlling the country politically, but he owns it, a little bit like Berlusconi tried to own Italy through the financial and the media, and then Putin has that plus oil and gas plus transport infrastructure plus internet. He's a shareholder through different avatars like friends, etc. So there's going to be a big war for who's going to be controlling that when he dies, you know. So that's going to be probably tearing the country apart. So within 10 years from now, things are going to be very difficult for Russia. And then he's tried to make it stronger, but he set in motion the processes that will, and he let out the demons, such as aggressive nationalism, imperialism, intolerance. He legitimized violence. He sent hundreds of thousands of people to kill and to face death, you know, and then they're coming back. And these people can make revolutions. Like so far in Russia, it's just the intelligentsia which went down to the streets and they never took a brick in their hands. Like compare that to the hundreds of thousands of veterans coming back from the front line. So it's going to be very upsetting and definitely not like he thought it would be.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
But basically, the economy is not doing so bad. And if you talk, let's take the big cities. I mean, not talking about the whole of Russia. But there is people, earning good money and saying, "Oh, I don't want to think about."
Yeah,
bad things."
first of all, Russia is still a market economy, so it's handling the shocks of sanctions better than the Soviet economy would have handled them, right? It's adjusting. It's the people on the places taking initiatives, making like bribing some people or finding ways around to bypass the sanctions. So a market economy is adjusting itself better than a planned economy. So the catastrophe hasn't happened. It's not clear how, but purely mathematically, when you have 500,000 people conscripted, and when you're producing, when you're producing hysterically tanks, what is the value? The tanks costs a lot, but is used for a couple of days, and then it's not a production. It keeps people busy, so you don't have you don't have unemployment. But ultimately, war costs a lot, and the income of money is going to be shrinking because of the sanctions. So it's not a question of collapsing the economy having collapsed like within days, but definitely within years, we're going to see a very different country.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. I'm very happy that you came here, and we touched something different today. I think
there was one more question. I think. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
I was getting ready to thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for bringing him.